The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. It is Music Monday once again on the Nerdcast Empire. So great to have you along with us. This is actually our 4th episode of Music Monday, and want to shout out everybody who has listened to the first 3 episodes. And if you haven't, you can still go back and check those out wherever you get your podcasts. And we've had a ton of people listening in and messaging us on social media. We really thank you. And a big thanks to the bands who have shared our posts and commented as well. We really do appreciate that. Our job is to try to promote you and what you're doing. And if you in turn promote us, that's just an added bonus, honestly, for us. And we really do appreciate that. But we're back with another week of great music selections. On Music Monday, we're going to be looking at the music from February the 23rd. And it's time to introduce the crew. It's our normal crew once again. Joining me in studio once again is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It is going all right. I'm excited to get into another week of music. And man, there was a lot to get through.
There was a lot of music to get through. Mike puts together these lists and they get longer, I think, every week. But there's a lot of really good stuff this week and really tough to narrow it down to 6 choices. But that's what our job is. And joining us from parts unknown once again to weigh in on Music Monday is Chris. Chris, how's it going out your way?
Going great. Much like you said, there's a lot of stuff we had to get through this week. And this was the first week where I actually didn't make it through our entire playlist. So kind of a good problem to have, I'd say.
Yeah, no question about it. I think our lists just get longer and longer. And of course, if you watch the YouTube version of the video, we always encourage you to listen wherever you get your podcast. Please continue to do that. That helps us out tremendously. But we also post a YouTube version of the podcast. And in that YouTube version, there is a link to the playlist that Mike creates every week. So if you want to listen to every single song that's on our list that Mike puts together from that release date, you can do that and you can kind of pick your own favorites. So that's always an option. But again, if you're listening where your podcasts come from, we certainly appreciate that. That certainly helps us out tremendously. Again, we're going to be looking at the music from February the 23rd. Some great stuff this week. Really hard to narrow this down to 6. And then on the other side of the break, we'll get into the vault. We've got some really good picks for the vault this week. We're going to start off with Mike, as we always do. And Mike, what is your first choice for new music from February 23rd?
Yeah, so like I said, there was a lot to get through. And for me, I always try to find something that maybe isn't just about the music. There's something a little more into it, something interesting. And for my first pick, I have chosen Blood Opera with their debut full-length album, Songs in the Key of Death.
Solid, man. And then I'll let you get to your description of these guys. When you told me what these guys were about, when you read the description, I was pretty sure I was going to hate this. And then we watched the video and I thought, this is great. I cannot believe how good this is. Talk about Blood Opera.
Yeah, so they've been around since 2017. They consider themselves Toronto's only horror movie heavy metal band. Just to kind of get further into that, the artwork for their first album looks like something you'd find in like a terrible 80s horror movie VHS case that would be at the movie shop in town, mixed with like really bad 80s thrash metal cover art. It's really outstanding. Yeah, the music kind of mixes several genres like hard rock, horror, punk, heavy metal, with a serious kind of pop and symphonic and electronic influence as well. It comes off a little more like horror pop rock at times than it does metal, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that's what I wasn't ready for. I was really expecting it to sound a little bit more like your vault pick. We'll not to spoil that a little bit later, but that's kind of the sound I thought we were going to hear. And then it really came across almost ghost-like, not quite to that degree, but it's basically something with the visuals that are there to be scary, but the music itself really isn't. It is very pop driven music that, again, if you haven't given me the description of them before you played that song, I would have never guessed those two would have been connected.
Yeah, the Ghost comparison I think is fair. It's almost like they have a little more of a pop sensibility than Ghost does, where Ghost kind of seems more like really classic rock sounding. This has definitely heavier keyboards, I think, as far as presented in a way that's more pop music-ish. But you know, they've since 2017, they've made big appearances at Canadian horror and rock conventions, Shock Stock and Frightmare in the Falls, to name a couple. I thought what was really interesting is they were actually the opening band at the It's Alive exhibit, which is Kirk Hammett's classic horror movie art exhibit, when they hosted it at the Royal Ontario Museum. So clearly these dudes, they have some level of credibility to what they do.
Yeah, no question about that. And this release, Songs in the Key of Death, is it's just a really solid rock release.
Yeah, I was super impressed by it. Their most recent single, Be My Victim, actually also includes Tony Todd, the actor who played the Candyman in the horror movie. I definitely recommend that. Don't Go Out Tonight, Fight to Survive, Gates of Hell, all great tracks. I mean, just check these guys out. If you're into horror movies and the music around those even, I think you'll enjoy it.
And I think just before I throw it to Chris to kind of get his thoughts on these guys, the first track on this album is a 1-800 number. And it is the 1-800 number from the side of the barrel from the first Return of the Living Dead, which since has, at least at one point, it was a phone sex line. And then evidently it was a Carnival Cruise scam line. So you might not want to call that number, but it does tell you that there's that horror tie-in that clearly they knew that that's something that would pop fans of horror movies. So we're going to throw that in as the title of the first track, but really good stuff. Chris, your thoughts on Blood Opera?
Yeah, the band does two things that I really love is that they can tell a story with their album, a comedic one in this instance. I believe it opens up with them, someone digging in a graveyard, trying to find this buried CD from this long lost band that never had it released. And it winds up starting a zombie apocalypse. So love it when a band can tell a hilarious story. And then I also love whenever someone like kind of Rob Zombie style brings in quotes from movies, especially, old 80s horror movies that I may have never seen. And it gets me looking, trying to find where that quote was from or what movie it was from. Or they can find a quote that fits the theme of the song perfectly. And they're able to do that at least once on this album.
Yeah, it's just a really solid album. I was, again, not expecting what we got, but it was really, really good.
It's the correct type of cheesy, I think, where sometimes when bands try to not be cheesy, it inadvertently becomes that way. These guys seem to really embrace that, and it makes for a better product.
I think once you embrace it, I think you can be on the right side of that line. I think it's when sometimes you don't embrace it that it comes across even more so. But Blood Opera really knocked it out of the park with Songs in the Key of Death. Definitely check that out. That is one of two excellent new releases that you are spotlighting this week. Mike, what is the second one?
My second one is from a band called Toxikull, a Portuguese thrash metal band, and this is their third album, Under the Southern Light.
One thing you're going to find out if you're just new to this podcast on Music Monday is we're pretty much pulling music from everywhere in the world. We've had bands from Tunisia. We've had several bands from Scandinavia. We're now going to Portugal, and specifically the capital of Lisbon for Toxikull. Really great sounding release.
Yeah, I kind of got into this the second I heard the first track, and it continued to be very strong through the other tracks. But first off, like the album artwork gives me very Judas Priest vibes, kind of Sad Wings of Destiny or Anger's Angels Cry, just really cool artwork. From what I read, I'm not really familiar with their back catalog, that this was more of like a departure from the more speed metal-esque sound they have. And it kind of feels like they're going for more of an arena metal, like just classic heavy metal sound. I think their Bandcamp page even referred to it as like a Sunset Strip sound, which is certainly up my alley as well.
Yeah, it was definitely, I didn't hear the speed metal. And then when you say that they've gotten away from it a little bit on this album, it makes total sense because it does sound like something that would have toured arenas with Judas Priest or somebody like that in the late 80s, early 90s before the grunge era took over. But just, again, just a really great rock album. It's got all the technical characteristics of a speed metal type band, but just also great vocals to go on top of it.
Yeah, and I wasn't surprised as I kept reading into their bio that, they do kind of compare themselves to like the 80s Ozzy and Dio and Priest, Accept, Saxon, etc. The other thing I found kind of interesting is when they went into kind of the theme of the album is, the Under the Southern Light, kind of referring to living under the lights of Lisbon, and just kind of how that can be such a great thing. There's a lot of positive to that. But as the singer says, the light that feeds is also the light that burns. And there's a lot of negativity that corresponds with that they kind of delve into this album. And it kind of gives it that extra level of depth.
Yeah. And I think that's anytime you find something like that, it's, it gives you another layer of storytelling to this album and also kind of takes you inside what the band is going through. It's not just some superficial album with made up lyrics. It's actually telling a story of some of the things these guys have gone through. And when you're playing this type of music in different parts of the world, you're going to have a much different experience than some of these other bands. So I really do like that aspect.
Yeah. And at the same time, I think that it kind of also brings to light some of the similarities you experienced. You know, they mentioned that in a place with so much light and joy and potential, there's also scarcity of opportunities and the future looks dark and, you know, there are shadows around. I think that's something that more and more people can relate to. And it doesn't matter what part of the world you're in, you kind of do experience that duality.
Yeah, I think so. But that's what makes music great is you can take differences and bring them together. And I think that's another great thing about this podcast, is the chance to spotlight people around the world that are kind of in the same cause as the things that we really like. It's bands that are trying to make a difference and maybe try to break out of whatever situation they're in, which may not always be the best situation.
Yeah, definitely. And as far as kind of the standout tracks, we're looking at Night Shadows, Around the World, Going Back Home, and the title track, Under the Southern Light. That one kind of has like a kind of a power ballady tone to the guitars in it. Just really cool sound, and definitely check it out.
Yeah, really good band from Portugal, the capital of Lisbon. So definitely check out Toxikull's Under the Southern Light. Chris, your thoughts on Toxikull?
Yeah, sometimes when I'm listening to these bands, it can take me a second to kind of pin down what their sound is, but as you mentioned, right from the opening track, I went, well, this sounds exactly like Painkiller era Judas Priest, and absolutely loved it. I mean, Judas Priest being on my Mount Rushmore of greatest metal bands of all time, and I think that's a pretty amazing review in itself. But as I kind of got deeper into the album, I also got kind of that Sunset Strip mix in, like Mike mentioned. I almost felt like a tinge of Skid Row kind of mixed into their sounds. So what they do well, and it's fast and it's heavy.
Yeah, it's just really solid all the way around. I think everybody who's into those type of bands that Chris mentioned will certainly find something on this Toxikull album they're really going to like. Definitely check out Under the Southern Light, Mike's second choice for this week. We're going to move on to Chris in Parts Unknown, and we're going to find his two choices this week. And again, a lot of great stuff to choose from. Chris, what was your first choice for this week's Music Monday?
Yeah, my choices this week are going to resemble kind of very similar to my picks from the first week. I've got some alternative taste in there mixed with a little more psychedelic. So opening up with my first band, I chose a band called TimeLost and their new album Drained. This is a band that's been around since 2017. And I don't do this intentionally, but I know last week when we covered Bokassa, they had kind of come up with their own terminology for what type of music they made. And I wound up doing that again. It turns out that TimeLost produces what they call grunge gaze music, which is a combination of grunge and shoegaze, which if they've done nothing else, they've taught me the term shoegaze, and that it's kind of a more on the happy side of alternative. Think Dinosaur Jr. or kind of Weezer-esque sounds. Definitely right up my alley. I always have a thing for alternative music. If I had to pick songs off of this album to check out, a lot of the singles that they released, Diet Strangers, Wet J come to mind. But really the whole album front to back is a must listen. If you actually go on their Facebook, they've been having some recent reviews, and Church Road Records posted the epitome of all killer, no filler. And I totally agree with that. If you're into alternative, more indie sounding bands, then it's definitely right up your alley.
You know, when I listened to this album, what I got to listen to of it, it reminded me very much of the type of bands that I would see on the occasion where my friends and I would go to the Mad Frog down in Cincinnati. And I mean that in the most positive way. Like, it feels very much like these bands that have been grinding away, touring, playing small houses, kind of refining their style. And it feels like a very straightforward type live band that you would hear that just kind of really knows what their sound is, what they're really looking for. And it feels like with this release, they've really kind of nailed that. And I think I can appreciate that. It's very, like you said, very straightforward, very alternative, modern alternative, maybe. I don't know if you want to call it that, but these guys really did a nice job.
Yeah, and we always like bands that have kind of a story behind them. And in looking up some of these interviews with the band, they mentioned that it was initially kind of a file sharing effort from 1,000 miles apart. And now it's kind of evolved into a dedicated project out of Philadelphia. looking into some of their music that they were into growing up, I felt a lot of connection there. I mean, in just a couple sentences, they bring up both No Doubt's Tragic Kingdom, but then also how that developed into becoming obsessed with Korn and Marilyn Manson. They bring up the Spice Girls at one point, Napalm Death. So I'm right along with them in having just kind of this vast array of music in rotation. And always nice to see fellow, music lovers of just pretty much music all around.
Yeah, my thought on that was they seem like the kind of band you would have heard in the mid to late 90s at a college campus or something to that effect. Or maybe there was a period of time there in the late 90s where your WB shows would always feature like smaller rock bands. This seems like the kind of song that would have appeared at the end of one of those episodes. I definitely see the Weezer comparison, almost like a less refined, less polished version of them. But yeah, that's not a bad thing at all.
Not at all. I thought it was a really solid release from TimeLost, the album called Drained. Certainly check that out. Well, Chris, very interesting choice for number one. What is your second pick this week?
Pick number two is complete end of the opposite end of the spectrum. It's a band called Monkey 3, all one word, with their latest release, Welcome to the Machine. Back on my first edition of Music Mondays, I mentioned how I love kind of ethereal or spacey vibes, and this band does it, and they do it without vocals. It's a purely instrumental band. Absolutely love that. And they're able to tell an amazing kind of spacey story. Going to their website and just kind of checking out their bio, I think they say it best. The new album, Welcome to the Machine's musical themes are inspired by movies such as 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Matrix, Sunshine, Solaris, and 1984. So it's in just musically, it's covering kind of this dystopian feeling. Melancholic destruction is what they call it. Dark, menacing, and as they said, it's the perfect soundtrack to a journey into the unknown.
Yeah, not the first instrumental act we featured. Kind of the pre-Music Monday, we had an instrumental group as well. And this was definitely interesting stuff. My feelings on instrumental groups is you've really got to be outstanding to kind of take that next step, because there is always going to be that feeling, man, what if you had a vocalist? Like, what if you had that other piece to the puzzle? And these guys do a really good job of putting together something that kind of ties everything together without having that tie together, the vocal that usually brings the whole mix together. But it is definitely, I don't want to say it's out there, because that's probably too generic a term, but it's definitely interesting. And what I really enjoy out of instrumental groups is that you do have to kind of take some chances, because you're going to be without that vocal track. And I think these guys did a really good job of giving you something that was going to be an interesting listen, even without knowing that you were going to have lyrics and vocals on the track as well.
When I first listened to this, I hadn't really read their bio or anything, but the first thing that came to mind was these guys are writing the score to some dystopian future sci-fi movie. And that's to find out that's a lot of their inspiration seemed to come together logically for me really well. And I think that's kind of what's amazing about something like Bandcamp. I mean, we don't really talk about it a lot, but that's where we find a lot of this music from our list is, they have their own personal band camps with their music and their merch. Is that these guys would never have been signed to a major record label in the pre-internet days. That's just no one's looking for this, but you can go to a resource like Bandcamp and find this along with super radio friendly sounding AOR rock. There's no limits to what your creativity is going to produce now, because you're not seeking that validation of a label saying, okay, yeah, we'll let you create music.
I think it's one of the best things about the internet age, because there's certainly plenty of negatives, but one positive is you can find that audience out there. It's out there. As we've shown you just with the three of us, we all kind of have slightly different tastes in music, but expand that across the entire world. You've got people that are going to really like the thing that you do. And if you can put together a page like Bandcamp and get your music and your merch out there, and then, maybe eventually tour and do those sorts of things, you can basically get some level of fame from the ground up. That was something that was almost impossible before. You had to be lucky in the right place at the right time and trade tapes with the right person and end up in the right venue. Like, now you can kind of do that without leaving your hometown. And like the first band, TimeLost, they mentioned kind of doing it remotely over the internet. You can even do that nowadays with mixing software and things like that. So it's great to see bands like Monkey 3 that can kind of do that thing and find that audience that's out there that really likes that thing. And like you said, probably wouldn't have been on mainstream radio 15, 20 years ago, but that doesn't mean that you can't be really successful doing that kind of thing.
I was actually watching a video from Rick Beato where he was interviewing a friend of his who I believe works for Live Nation. I think it was one of those big like ticket broker kind of people that put on concerts. But they were talking about kind of the difference now in like the album release cycle and how, you know, back in the day, like if you didn't do press or tour in certain regions or countries like that, your album just wouldn't be released there. And nowadays you can release your music anywhere. Like there's no limitation to that, whether you have a presence there or putting money into that or not.
Yeah, it's a crazy world we're living in. Chris, did you have anything else to add on Monkey 3?
I know they kind of looking into their sound and how they describe themselves as psychedelic or stoner rock. I think it's kind of interesting how many bands that kind of stoner rock genre seems to include. I know, Mike, you kind of mentioned at one point in our Discord, it's almost as if there's so much of it out there that the market can't handle it. And it's kind of a shame because it does encompass such a wide variety. I mean, going back once again to Bokassa about how they kind of talk about stoner rock influences in their sound, but then you have Monkey 3 here who is totally different edge of the spectrum and more spacey with their sound. And it's just interesting how many different bands one genre can include.
Yeah, it's pretty much all over the spectrum. And so much of our list each and every week encompasses bands of that genre.
I don't know if we've started a kind of a map yet. I know we've joked about getting a map and putting pins down for all the places that these bands are from. But if we haven't already, we can add Switzerland to the list as well.
Yeah, going back to the stoner rock tag, I don't know if part of that is just because of the whole Bandcamp. You're going to put as many tags on your page as you can, so that just seems like a catch-all for a lot of these bands. But yeah, there's so many different sounds that seem to end up with the psych rock or stoner rock tag that I don't really even know what that means for the sound anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I load our videos and podcasts up with tags to try to catch anybody you can find on the internet. So it could be something to do with that. But two really great choices again from Chris this week. Time to get to my choices. And I feel like I certainly have a stereotypical sound that leads to these choices. But we're going to start off with the band Arkado with the song Open Sea. Arkado, interesting group, originally founded in 1983, but really didn't do a whole lot as a band, then just broke up. They would occasionally get together to play from time to time until 2018 when they finally got a couple of new members and they got everybody back together and they started releasing albums. And we now have this new one, Open Sea, which it's just got a great rock sound to it. It's, you know, they're from Sweden. You know what type of music I talk about here on the podcast. They very much fit that style of music, your European power metal type music. It's a really good release from them. Leading tracks on this one, the title track, Open Sea, Running Through the Night, Rising High. But it's really a good listen front to back. Like I said, another group that fits right into all these other groups that I choose. I really enjoyed this release.
Yeah, now, you know, knowing the backstory a little bit, it's kind of a shame they didn't get it together and actually release this in 1983 or when it would have been otherwise 85, 86. I think it would have certainly fit in really well with the sound that was prevalent then. The lead singer, Philip Lindstrom, dude has an amazing voice, no doubt. A couple thoughts I had while listening to it was that if their guitarist bought a talk box, they could basically just replicate Bon Jovi's classic sound. That's kind of where they are. I don't know what it is, but the Scandinavian bands in general seem to have just mastered the art of keyboard guitar rock, because that's what this is, and it's done perfectly.
And keyboard guitar rock is just about my favorite type of metal. I mean, we talk about Sonata Arctica a lot, and we'll be talking about them coming up here very soon because their new album just recently dropped. So we're going to be spotlighting their album specifically when we get to that week on top of our regular picks. But Chris, your thoughts on Arkado?
Yeah, I think I brought it up. I didn't know what to expect going into the opening track with it being all instrumental. It was just waiting to hear what this was going to be. And as soon as that second track popped up and I heard those booming European vocals, I knew like this is right down Matt's alley, and I was impressed. Beautiful vocals, and definitely not surprised to see it on your list.
Yeah, it's got a great sound. If you enjoy that type of music, you're going to enjoy their band.
I think that's one of the cool things about this is that when you first start a new song from a band you've never heard of, and like they don't initially totally tip their hand as to what they are. There's the hesitation of like, okay, I could see this going one of two ways. How are we going to do this? And then it hits like, oh, I'm going to enjoy this, or oh, why did you go that route? What are you thinking? It makes it fun.
Yeah, and it definitely goes in a great direction. So definitely check that out if you get the chance. The other choice I have this week, another band that kind of falls into my wheelhouse, is a British band that's been around since 1980 called Lionheart, and their latest release, The Grace of a Dragonfly. This is another group that's kind of gone through some members over the years. They've kind of settled on the lineup now with this new release, and AOR pretty much describes this band, your arena rock type group. It feels very much like a classic rock album. You see where a lot of these band members have come from or worked with. They're groups like Michael Schenker and Def Leppard and UFO and groups that just like, yeah, that's that 80s kind of rock metal type sound. That's clearly what they're going for. This is a concept album, I guess, if you will, talking about World War II. Basically talks about how, nobody likes war, but at the same time, we want to show respect for the people who did serve in wars and protect our freedom type of thing. So it's kind of that balancing act between those two things. But it's just, again, great classic rock sounding album. Leading tracks on it were Flight 19, V is for Victory, and Little Ships. Just a really solid classic rock release from a British band that's been around for quite a while.
It's kind of interesting. I felt like it was a little more of a stripped down sound compared to some of the other melodic keyboard laden bands that we've listened to up to this point. And also kind of a different sound for a band writing songs about World War II. You're not used to that. You're used to more aggressive metal with World War II type music or war in general. Obviously they have a song about bomber planes that disappeared over the Bermuda Triangle in 1945. So that's really cool. The Longest Night about London getting blitzkrieged in 41. So just really cool stuff. Definitely enjoyable.
Yeah, if you like history and you like classic metal type sound, you're going to really enjoy Lionheart. Chris, your thoughts?
Like you said, classic 80s sound. I never knew there could be this many metal songs about planes was my first thought, but definitely double down as far as your track listing goes. Flight 19 blew me away. So if you're going to check out any one, I'm doubling down on that one.
Yeah, just real solid sound. Definitely a little bit different, but really enjoyed it, and certainly look forward to maybe checking out some of their older stuff as I kind of go through their catalog. So that's 6 really great choices this week from us on the new music from February the 23rd. We're going to step aside here. When we come back, we're going into the vault. We got 3 great picks for you from the vault, and that'll wrap up this edition of Music Mondays here on the Nerdcast Empire on the other side of this timeout. Back on the Nerdcast Empire, Music Mondays is back and better than ever. Episode number 4 of Music Mondays. So glad to have you along with us, with the guys in the studio and in parts unknown. Don't forget to check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. You can check out our store. We have merch for sale on our store at nerdcastempire.com/store. You can rep the Nerdcast Empire wherever you go. Of course, coming up next Sunday, we'll have another regular edition of the Nerdcast Empire. And then 1 week from today, it'll be another episode of Music Monday, and we will be reviewing the releases from March the 1st. Hard to believe we are already up to March. And our goal may be eventually to kind of catch up and have our shows more closely line up with the release dates. We'll see if we can do that in the future. But for now, we're going to run a couple weeks behind. So we'll give you the music from March the 1st coming up next week on Music Mondays on the Nerdcast Empire. But it's time to go into the vault. We've got 3 great picks from the vault once again this week. Mike's going to continue his alphabetical push through the vault, and quite a vault he has. But before we get to Mike's pick, we're going to start off with Chris once again for this segment of the vault. And Chris, what is your choice this week?
Yeah, I wanted to give our vault kind of a little bit of grunge put in there because I feel like it's lacking. So I went with Alice in Chains, kind of still staying mainstream as far as bands go, but The album I wouldn't say is necessarily one that people would go out of their way to listen to immediately, and that is the self-titled Alice in Chains album. Not to say that this is in any way, a downgrade from any of their previous albums. It's just that overall it may not have been as successful. Only double platinum when compared to Facelift and Dirt, which were triple and quintuple platinum, and not necessarily as many singles that garnered a lot of radio play like Dirt and Facelift. But honestly, I think that the fact that this album was even made is kind of a miracle in itself. I mean, this was the last album to feature Lane Staley before he inevitably passed away. And his kind of state at this time, I mean, they were ending their tour. They had to shut down their tour with Metallica, Suicidal Tendencies, and Danzig because of his state. They had to be replaced by Candlebox on that tour. And I mean, there were times where they were recording where they weren't even really together. They were kind of separated, recording separate parts. Staley going out, kind of doing his side project with Mad Season at the time. And it's a wonder that we received this. And not only that, it's amazing that it had such amazing tracks and such quality to it. During this time, I mean, this was a time where people had just gotten over the death of Kurt Cobain. Soundgarden was seemingly heading toward the more mainstream, and Pearl Jam was locked in a battle with Ticketmaster, kind of going off of some online reports here. But Alice in Chains, even off of the Kurt Cobain disaster, even though Lane Staley's not gone, they're kind of being written off. This is just, why should we stick with these guys? He's hopped up on heroin and drugs. What's the quality going to be on another album? But I think they proved everybody wrong. It opens up with their song Grind, kind of saying, don't count us dead yet. The body's not dead. We're still here. Brush Away, track number 2, always sneaks up on me. The chorus to Goddamn is absolutely beautiful. I recommend anybody check that out. And even besides Heaven Beside You and Again, which were some of their singles, Over Now is kind of the perfect ending to the album and almost kind of an ironic ending to the Lane Staley era of Alice in Chains. They do still continue to make albums, and it's great to see them still making music. But this one still holds a kind of a firm place in my heart. I know when I was playing music with my brothers, when we had our band of brothers, Alice in Chains was always listed. And Again, especially holds a special place in my heart, as it was the first song that I ever learned to play drums on. So amazing album. Definitely check it out. Give it a shot, especially if you're into their more mainstream albums.
Well, first off, knowing your brothers, it does not surprise me at all that Alice in Chains was on the list, knowing their music taste. So that definitely makes a ton of sense. I was really surprised when I started to do research on this, because I love this album. I think it's great. Some great tracks on here, but the critics really panned this. You look at the review scores from some of the critics at the time, and they were not very good, which is really surprising, because I think especially the singles off of this album are some of their best stuff. And Heaven Beside You is one of my all-time favorite Alice in Chains songs, and it's great. I've always been a big Alice in Chains fan, and I think if you're looking to get in the door with them, this is not a bad place to start.
It's funny because that was kind of around when I really started getting into music just in general. So even though I was probably aware of some of their earlier hits, this was kind of the first album that was on my radar when it was new. So, I think Again was probably the first song I saw on MTV of theirs, where it's like, oh, this is really cool. I like this. Obviously Grind is great. Heaven Beside You and Over Now, I think, are tremendous because they really are great examples of just the vocal ability of the band. I think, I don't think anyone would argue, or if they would be wrong. Alice in Chains, musically speaking, one of the most talented in that grunge era of bands. Cantrell and Staley both just phenomenal.
It's almost unfair that obviously they were a grunge band, but it's almost unfair that they get categorized as such, because it's so limiting to me. This is a band that would have been a huge hit in any era of rock music. They just happen to be in the grunge era, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think they were definitely different than what was popular before that. And I think that could turn people off. I mean, there was always stories of the first time they went on tour with like Megadeth and having stuff thrown at them. But I think they were a sound that people would warm up to no matter when.
Yeah, just a really great group, really great album. Definitely check out the self-titled Alice in Chains album as Chris's pick from the vault this week. Let's move to Mike. Mike, you are moving through the alphabet. Where are we landing this week, and what is your pick from the vault?
Yeah, I was kind of looking through the vault, and the letter C was kind of light, actually. There were a few bands that I have multiple albums of from that letter, but not a whole lot of variety. But my vault pick for this week is going to be Cradle of Filth's 7th studio album from 2006, Thornography.
So obviously I know you're a huge Cradle of Filth fan, and I'll let you talk about them in a moment. And this specific album, which is a really good album. Cradle of Filth's always been one of those bands that I love their music. Their music is amazing. I think how much you love Cradle of Filth will always come down to what you think of Danny Filth's vocal work.
Yeah.
And maybe I don't love it as much as other singers of that style, because he does have a style to him, but I do think the whole picture, the whole thing works really well for them.
Yeah, my first interaction with them happened from, I think, what was it, 2000 or 2001, their album Midian. And hearing the song Cthulhu Dawn for the first time blew my mind. Just his shrieking and just the musicianship above all else was just on a different level to me. I never really got into them in totality, I think, because of the voice in a lot of ways. It just was still kind of off-putting. By the time they got to like Nymphetamine and then eventually Thornography, I think they did kind of adopt a little more of a mainstream vocal presentation. This album itself, people kind of talk about it being more guitar driven, almost more like gothic metal or symphonic metal with some black metal there still too. And I think that made it a lot more accessible to me even.
Yeah, I think it made it more accessible to rock fans in general, and really kind of what maybe got them even past their more niche audience and into more of a wide metal and rock audience that they reached with this album.
Yeah, and I think because of that, it did kind of get some mixed reviews from people. Terrorizer called it sharp, slick, elegant, focused. They were a music magazine that sadly went defunct in 2018. But yeah, I just think they started realizing they could achieve a little more mainstream success. And honestly, there was just a more complete sound you could get with the additional vocalists, the mixture of kind of the shrill sounds and the actual singing. But yeah, I would certainly check it out. Dirge Inferno, Tonight in Flames, The Byronic Man, Cemetery and Sundown, Fetus of a New Day Kicking, just all tremendous tracks. And man, I listened to that album so many times back in 2006.
Yeah, great album. Like I said, their music is really on another level. And I think this was the album where you really kind of saw all the pieces kind of fit together into this really strong release. Chris, your thoughts on the Cradle of Filth album?
Yeah, you talked about it being accessible, and prior to this, I had never listened to Cradle of Filth. I think I'd heard Mike talked about them a couple of times, but probably around the time that I first heard of Cradle of Filth, I wouldn't say that my music taste was necessarily ready for them. I mean, looking at their font for their name, we kind of call that the Brushfire font.
Yeah, definitely.
Being labeled as kind of a darker metal, I'd say I wasn't ready for them back in the day, but definitely am now. And this was a great album as far as an introduction for me, not just because of how accessible the sound and the kind of guitar driven themes are, but lyrically, I am down and I'm into any kind of written work that talks about kind of religious imagery, idolatry, anti-religion message even. And this album is just full of those types of tracks. Even verging on, and I know you mentioned Cthulhu Dawn off of a different album, and that opening track they say kind of is right in line with that Cthulhu Dawn vein. So I was all for it, and this is definitely going to have me listen to a lot more Cradle of Filth.
Yeah, great album, great band. Definitely check out. This is a great place to kind of get in the door with Cradle of Filth, and you can kind of move on in from there. So we moved to my pick, and I'll be honest, I really kind of wanted to pick this one the very first week we did this show because this may be one of my all-time favorite albums, but I held off. I went a couple of different directions, but after spending a couple of weeks in Japan, we're going to swing back away from Japan. We're going to get to a super group, I guess, if you could call them that. It is the Alan Lande project, I guess, for lack of a better.
Alan Parsons project, I think.
Parsons project. The project from Russell Allen and Jorn Lande released 4 great albums, but this one is The Battle, was released in 2005. This is just so good. Obviously, Russell Allen, probably best known for his work with Symphony X as the lead singer. Jorn Lande has been everywhere. He's been with Master Plan, obviously. He's done some singing with Avantasia. And the guy is everywhere, basically. He's done a ton of stuff. And all the tracks were written by Magnus Carlsen, who's worked with so many big name groups and pairings of super musicians, basically, from Frontier Records. He was the guy that would kind of be the one they would call upon to write this stuff. And just wrote a awesome album here. Honestly, this is one of those albums that I listened to when I was working jobs where I could listen to music all night because I was working a mindless job. And I would put this on. There was a track on YouTube that had the whole album. So I would just listen to the whole album beginning to end. And I think this is power metal. I guess I should mention that. This is just amazing vocals, amazing music. There really is not a bad track on this album. It starts out with Another Battle and then Hunter's Night. And then you get Wish for a Miracle coming number 3, Reach a Little Longer, Come Alive, great track. Truth About Our Time, My Own Way Home. And it goes all the way down to the end. This is a front to backer for me. I will always listen to this whole album when I put it on. I can't talk enough about these guys. Like, if you need me to give you an album to tell you, like, this is what I love in rock and metal music, I would probably just give you this album, and this would pretty much describe it.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Magnus Carlsen, not only did he do the first 3 albums with Allen and Lande, he did 2 albums with Kisk and Somerville, which Kisk being one of the singers from Halloween, and 2 Allen and Olsen, Annette Olsen albums. Dude clearly has the formula figured out as far as I'm going to write and perform all the music. You guys we're going to get you to sing it, and it's going to be ridiculously catchy and ear pleasing and tremendous on every level. I thought it was kind of interesting that their 4th album, Allen and Lande, they brought in Timo Tolkki to do kind of the Magnus Carlsen role, who this guy is also just another genius, ex-Stradivarius, just multi-instrumentalist, just phenomenal. Jorn Lande, you can't say enough about him. Interesting that, he kind of first was on people's radar from his work with Master Plan, which was actually a band created by ex-members of Halloween after they left. I would also check out his solo stuff. He has a couple cover albums that he's released and just covering everything from, Kate Bush to can't think of what all else. But just tremendous cover tunes. I can't recommend that enough either.
Yeah, I'd forgotten he'd done the cover of You're the Voice.
Yeah, You're the Voice. He did that as well.
So good. His band Jorn, that it was just his solo project. And I mean, I can't really say enough about this album. I love this album, and I want everybody to love this album. And I think Chris just got exposed to it for the first time with this podcast. Chris, your thoughts on Alan Lande?
Yeah, I know this is described as power metal, but I almost want to say that this is a whole tier elsewhere. This is a step above. This is my first introduction to this project, and I'm blown away. I know I mentioned to you in the Discord, this is right now my favorite vault pick that either of you have picked so far since we started doing this. And yeah, I can easily see why it's a front to backer for you, both musically and lyrically. I love the lyrical content. Wish for a Miracle, track 3, and it's the backing music is something that I could easily see. Just the entire soundtrack for a blockbuster movie is where I could see it. I could also see it in an RPG almost, and then you throw in these 2 amazing vocalists on top of it, and it creates perfection almost. So if any of the albums following this first album are in the same vein or right up the same alley as this one, then I can see myself listening to a lot of this Alan Lande project.
And it's funny because we've been running across a bunch of music lately where it is, these classic lead singers with a bunch of like new musicians. I'm not going to be shocked if somewhere in the process of this podcast, we don't come across another example of this that is new, where they've taken a couple of guys like this and put them with some young and up and coming band members and created some other new super group basically in the same formula.
Yeah, I would expect Frontiers to be behind anything like that. They seem to kind of own the market on that. Kind of getting back into Jorn's solo cover album. Just on the first album, you're talking Running Up That Hill, Kate Bush, Rev on the Red Line, Foreigner, You're the Voice, John Farnham. We got Don't Stop Believin', Journey, Killer Queen, Hotel California, Rainbow in the Dark. Dude's not afraid to cover the hits.
And my favorite fact, as I was doing some extra research on this, is before Russell Allen got into music, he was a jouster at Medieval Times Dinner Theater. That tells me so much. Like, clearly this is because it just feels like these are two guys that played D&D at some point in the 1980s. Like, their music style just kind of fits that. So for some reason, that fact didn't surprise me at all.
The other funny thing about Russell Allen, and I saw them live with Symphony X on one of the early like Megadeth Gigantor stops. And this was at Annie's, the outdoor, whatever you want to call that venue. But watch old Symphony X live. The dude's a great singer, but man, he's the most like awkward looking like air guitar guy while like his guitarist was wailing away. It just, something about it just always struck me as funny.
Yeah, he's so talented, and I would love for these guys to have some new stuff come up over the course of this podcast, because I think it would be amazing and would certainly be something I'd be interested in listening to. But that is going to wrap things up for this week of Music Mondays. So glad to have all of you along with us once again. Don't forget to check out our website at nerdcastempire.com. A big thanks to the guys for really all this hard work. Mike puts in a ton of work to put these lists together to allow us to go through them. Certainly appreciate that, and appreciate Chris taking some time out to be able to join us for this as well. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of our podcast. Coming up next Sunday, another edition of the Nerdcast Empire. And then 1 week from today, we'll have the next edition of Music Mondays when we go over the music of March the 1st. But that's going to wrap things up for the entire crew. I am Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.